Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, good. It's on. Great. If we could go over to the PowerPoint slide, please. So, thank you, Matthias, Claudia, and all the fantastic people at Music Tech Germany and Music Tech Europe. As Matthias said, I have been working in the world of music and music tech for the last 30 years, and I'm also the chair of Music Technology UK. Now, some of you may not know that we are still in Europe. Some idiots decided to shoot themselves in the foot and leave the EU, but I'm chair of Music Tech UK, and me and Gareth Deacon are here on behalf of Music Tech UK as well. Anyway, when Matthias told me about this session, sorry, let me just say that as well. He said to me, have you read this incredible book, Noise? And to my shame, I hadn't. So one of the things is I read it cover to cover. It's brilliant. I strongly suggest that you read it because it's extraordinary to think that this book was written 40 years ago. And it's been so, how can you say, prescient in terms of it. So what I thought I would do before we went into the panel was I'd seek to do the impossible, which was to distill the key elements of the book for you guys. And here it is, an extraordinary book by Jacques Attali. And really the key elements here was seeing music not so much as a form of entertainment, but a form of prophecy. To what extent could we almost envisage the world that we're now in? And this is the world that we're now in. He believed that music doesn't just reflect society, it can predict society. And what do we mean by that? Well, his central idea was essentially that music is prophecy, and its styles and economic organization are ahead of the rest of society. It's an early warning system of what is to come. And really seeing music as a mode of production, that sound is a political and economic and prophetic, and also noise represents the disruption and understanding the future order. I think we could say that we live in very turbulent times. And I suppose really what we want to understand is to what extent is music an indicator, an early warning system of the disruptive world that we're in right now. And he saw that there were 4 codes of music. That there was a sacrificial, if we go back to the origins of music, which were born of ritual and control. It was representative of hierarchy and the way that we actually notate music. It's repetitive, and that kind of industrial form of repetition and commodification represented how we amplified those thoughts. And we've got composing, an ability for those who don't have the talent, or they don't think so inherently, have the ability to be able to participate. And why this matters today is because it very much senses where we are now. We're in a world where every single one of you has a device very close to you right now with over 60 million to 100 million tracks. So streaming in many ways is a form of industrial repetition of music. We've got UGC platforms like TikTok and YouTube and SoundCloud, where we, with whatever level of talent, are composing, creating. And we've got AI. Is this a tool of mass repetition, or is it a whole new frontier? And we've also got genres such as hip-hop, grime, reggaeton, drill, predicting these social currents. That music is being sped up, adapted, distorted. Does that represent the times that we're in right now? So really the questions that we want to pose our fantastic guests today is understanding these elements. Are we in what Attali called the composing age? Or is this a new kind of algorithmic repetition? Get lots of people talking about AI slop. Lots of people talking about stuff. To what extent are we there? And based on those ideas, who controls music's future? Is it artists? Is it the platforms? Is it AI? Is it a form of society? And really, we need to now, in these turbulent times, look ahead. What can we find out from the music that we're in right now in order to predict this age of disruption? Or is music just going to shift to the background? Or a wallpaper that exists on playlists? I think these are the sorts of questions that we want to dive into today. Anyway, so without further ado, what I'd like to do is, if we can, by the power of Zoom, summon our guest of honor, Jacques Attali. Let's see if we can do that. Hey! Good morning. Bonjour.
Good morning. Sorry not to be with you. It's not a matter of age. It's a matter of broken leg.
Beautifully put.
Much more than happy.
Thank you so much, Michel Attali. It's a genuine honour. What I'd like to do first, before we come to you, is have our other two panellists introduce themselves, give them a bit of context, and then I'll come over to you, Jacques, for the first question. Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin Clancy. When I was a student, I researched many of these questions, and that's where I first met Jacques Attali, because as a student, I wrote to him and I asked him, Mr. Attali, are these questions that you were writing about in the composing book in 1977, is this AI? And he was gracious enough to write back and go, oui. That gave me confidence, and we've stayed in touch since, and he's contributed to a book on that. And so my approach to all of this is called AIOK, which is an ethical trading mark for best practices from consensus-based, but it's completely informed by Jacques' work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Davis. I'm here representing Downtown Music Publishing from New York. I work both in the publishing administration space with Downtown, handling all of our client correspondence, including everything administrative, rights, collections, clearances. On top of that, I also act as Downtown's in-house forensic musicologist, and for anyone unfamiliar with that term, I basically do the detective work. Anytime there's a potential infringement, I write the musical transcriptions, I write analysis, and combining both music theory and then administration experience, that's how I find myself here having this wonderful discussion with everyone. So I'm gracious to be here and very excited for our conversation.
Thank you. Jacques, in your own words, how do you see music today? What's the change that you feel is the most important happening right now?
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be with you and to be on this amazing panel discussing ideas that I launched almost 50 years ago, actually, because the book was written 50 years ago. It's a vertigo for me to think about it. But the music today is exactly online with what you predict, which is a mixture of repetition and composing. Repetition being the climax of where we are with not only the digital industry, but the AI as a technique to produce repetitive sound, as it has been since 50 years, actually, because repetition began in 50 years. And there was example in my book of a beginning of the first hints of repetition at that time. And composing was also slightly already there. And today we have both. There is another element, one dimension that you did not mention in my book, which is, in my view, very important, is that, as I said, music is predicting the evolution of society in general. And what is predicting today is the switch from Western world to Asian world, which is not yet seen, but in my view is appearing, and in my view not yet appearing as much as it should, which is the importance of Asia in music. We have seen that with K-pop, but in my view what is going to come is the appearance of China as a music fundamental player. Of course, we have already Africa as a wonderful, very important player, and the future of music is Africa, as well as the future of the world is Africa. And then there is also the geopolitical dimension of music, which is as a prediction, which is to be taken into account. If we come back to music as a technology, the jury is still out in order to know if we are going to a dictatorship of repetition or if composition is going to win. And composition is not a utopia, because you can have composition where each one of us is in his own world, totally isolated, as we see many examples of that in kind of metaphoric autism, where people are totally close to their own world. And that we see that with TikTok and other social networks, but we can see that also in composition. If you compose and no one is listening, that's a world of zombies, one listening to itself. Or you can have composition as a way to exchange and create together. And on that, music gives an example of that as a possible common creativity. What we don't see, and I'm very worried about that, is that in the past, music was also a change in the evolution of a social organization of political architecture. We moved from religion to middle class, from middle class to industry, etc. So as I explained in the book, through music as front runner of social changes. And what we see as a positive in music today is that the music is global, which is a good sign, because we have world problems and not national problems. We don't see too much of nationalistic music as we have seen in the past, and that is good news. But I don't see yet music being at the front runner of green issues or climate issues or global social changes as it should, which maybe is a hint that the world is blind, but it's something we may discuss later.
Sarah, as Matthias said, you're responsible for issues in relation to publishing, but also forensic musicology. Now, what are you noticing in terms of how value is moving to creators now in the compositional space?
Absolutely. I'll speak on both behalves, publishing and then from the musicology point of view. From the publishing point of view, and this is something Mr. Attali touched on in the very beginning of the book Noise, there is a huge shift between ownership and creators, where owners used to have all of the power. Old publishers, starting even from the 16th century, always were in control of rights. That stemmed from patronage, where all music was owned by the folks who, at that time, were responsible for influencing what compositions were and who was allowed to make music. And now publishing houses, here we are with record labels and reproduction of music. So that was a huge factor in the development of music. And now, with a little more decentralized view of the market, where anyone can create music, anyone can record music, and anyone can upload music. That's a huge shift in what we would consider overall music history, who has control over the value and the distribution of music. Now, from the musicology point of view, I think the value in some cases can come in the form of clearance, who has power to dictate what is permissible for use and what is not. That stems from rights holders themselves, governments, people who can control that type of clearance. So really any rights holder. In our case now, I think with Downtown, we are, shameless plug, a services-only business. We don't own any copyrights. We don't have any co-publishing agreements. We are exclusively administrative. That leaves all of the control with our writers, with our composers, with our estates, and every decision gets made directly by them. So that is a huge shift in who holds the value. It's whoever the owner is.
Thank you. Martin, from an AI and creative practice, what recent moment or tool feels meaningful to you, and why?
One of the things, and it's just really come back to me thinking about Noise and the fact that it's 50 years old, is that everything that we hear about AI is speed, change. It's hard to keep up. Here's a new tool, here's a new variation, here's a new problem. And yet everything was predicted quite clearly about this composing. So the part that I'm finding quite interesting and being in Berlin is Ableton. I'm a certified Ableton trainer. In 2017, I was teaching DJs, and I noticed what I refer to as a transfer of agency when I knew what that meant, when I introduced AI tools. And I think that their product development, especially when we look at DAWs and the integration of AI into band labs and into Udio buying, for instance, Asuno buying a DAW, Ableton's movement would seem to me to be quite old-fashioned, and being untethered from a computer. The idea of pushing the idea of chance and randomness, but using not AI to do that. But yet, if you lift the lid, the AI is there. It's in the browser to identify sonic characteristics between songs. So this idea of AI disappearing. And I think that I think Ableton are an interesting and quite old-fashioned, but yet highly innovative platform in this kind of area.
Thank you. Back to Jacques and the issue of music as prophecy and how that relates to things like discovery and recommendation. Now, Jacques, when our listening is guided by feeds and playlists, is that what is shaping how tastes are formed? Or is there something bigger than that?
Well, playlists are just the mirror of our tastes, and then it gives us the image of what tastes are around the world. And the playlists are either done by companies or by people themselves. And then I think globally, the playlist is the image of a taste, whatever it is. It is not, it's unfortunately not enough from guidance through education, musical education, and then the best of music is not at the top of playlist, in my view. But the playlist give the image of what the world is about. And when you have a K-pop as number one, or that doesn't give a good image of what mankind is about. That means that music is a mirror of a society which is looking, as you said at the beginning, at music as entertainment, mainly as entertainment as a way not to think of the problems of the world, not music as a way, as it was in the past and as it is in many occasions, music as a way to elevate. Because what music is about mainly is the first non-physical demonstration of beauty. Beauty means the best of mankind. And then music is a way for people to elevate. It's why it was used for religion, because it was a way to demonstrate that there is something beyond the monstrous materiality of our life and the despairing mortality of our life. That was the role of music as a proof of existence of gods, not God, but gods. And later on, it was also the proof of the amazing quality of market economy, middle class, bourgeoisie, because you have a music which is an amazing music at the 18th and 19th century, which was music of bourgeoisie, which was amazing, fascinating music, but as a proof of the value of a society. Do we have today a music which is a proof of a value by ethics and by this quality of beauty, of a value of a global tech society that we are in? I'm not sure. It's a mirror of something which is not pushing mankind beyond his natural limits. And I'm very worried not to see, even if they exist, and we can have different view of what it is, of what is masterpieces, which can last. Therefore, I would say that music as a pioneer. And why do I see that music as pioneer? Because it's much more easy to explore digital economy, and music is digital from the beginning, because music is immaterial from the beginning. It's easier to explore what is digital but what is material. And it's why music, as well as finance, is exploring the different possibility of reality much quicker than any other field which needs material change, etc. It's why music is always ahead, because it's digital. It's digital since 5 millennium. And today, music is not pushing us ahead of what could be the best of mankind, as it used to, I would say, up to the beginning of the 20th century. I think that would change. And then when the world began to be very worried of the future, moving from dissonance to repetitiveness as a kind of two warning signals. And today we move to pure entertainment as a way, in a certain sense, could be seen as okay, we give up. We are just going to use music as an entertainment and not as a way to push us beyond our own limits. And therefore, I am still expecting, and it exists, some proof of world success of a music that push us beyond our understanding what mankind is able to do. Am I clear?
Amen to that.
May I comment?
Please.
It's just such a fascinating conversation, especially I think right now we're talking about what, Mr. Attali just mentioned, there are no real masterpieces being made anymore. I mean, when was the last time you heard a full-length symphony that struck you? Or are you even aware of current classical composers who do such things? It just comes in other forms. And one of the things, especially I look at on the musicology side of things, is the melding of genre. There are so many commonalities in different segments of the world. The son clave rhythm out of Latin America being very similar to early drum patterns heard out of Africa. Why do all of these things from different areas of the world, cultures that have never had real connection, develop in a similar way? And now that everything is available for exploration through digital, through all of our, culminations of cultures, we see that in music. And where people have found commonalities that previously were undiscovered or unaware, now we can see the coming together of similar musical traditions, what's important in certain traditions versus others, certain instruments that might align and you might not have realized from other cultures. So I think that's the most fascinating part of view where we are right now, the unearthing of all of these traditions and how they can come together.
Thank you. Sarah, a lot of people here, and thank you for the answer, but a lot of people here are in the classic music industry. And they're trying to find ways that new writers and catalogues can find space to be discovered. How is that happening in this new noisy environment?
Absolutely. I think it's most interesting talking about sample interpolation, derivative work culture as a new facet of not only discovery, but also emergence for perhaps catalogs that have not had that kind of connection with current commercial music before. It's also very interesting to think about, same thing, that multitude of genre where, let's say, an old jazz tune that has not been heard by that many people unless you study jazz repertoire, becoming sampled in something like Adele's most recent record. And this is a really interesting melding of points where an estate, the owner of a catalog where the writer is unfortunately deceased, can have a new life through sample opportunities. And it's an interesting culture of discovery because lots of producers and artists want to be the crate digger and want to find samples on their own. It's a very difficult thing to pitch for. People want to be responsible for the discovery of something great. It really just shows that that discovery factor can come from anywhere, any person, anyone who is doing the work and looking for new ways to breathe life into older music.
Martin, for many years I worked in radio, where we said that the secret of radio was surprise and delight. Where do you still experience genuine surprise in the world of music and discovery? Is there a scene or a community? And what enables that surprise?
The first thing I'm surprised about is how much, when Mr. Attali mentioned beauty, it resonated with me as something that I don't think about very much. And yet that's kind of why we, in our own interpretations of what beauty is, probably why we all got involved in something as foolhardy as music. I'm also curious, and you'd asked me about a scene. I'm doing a talk later on with Hannah Cowhart, who's a brilliant researcher. And we've been chatting for the last one. She keeps talking to me about things that kind of strike me as kind of like Gen Z, but as OAPs, old age pensioners, which is this rejection of new technology. And what I'm curious about in that is, one, how because I love AI, because it helps me do things. But I'm thinking of an interesting one that occurred. So 50 years ago, Mr. Attali wrote Noise, and he actually predicted pretty much exactly where we are in this composing era, where the consumer would also be the producer of music. But it was impossible for him to also predict punk, which happened in 1977 when the book came out, and perhaps more importantly, hip-hop. So I'm bored, especially in the presence of the desire for beauty, by what we're doing with AI tools. Absolutely bored. But I'm kind of curious that in the history of music technology, everything has always been repurposed and reimagined. And I think that that is the bit that I'm looking for. I thought it might happen this summer, so I'm putting it for this winter. I'm keeping my eyes out for people who are really bad at using AI, but deliberately misappropriating it, being disrespectful. And I think that's where we may find beauty.
Fascinating, thank you. Now I'm going to come on to the more cultural elements of this. And Jacques, you write about noise being the start of something new. Is there a sound or a scene that feels like that to you? You mentioned the rise of Afrobeats and the rise of the East. What are those scenes, and what might they be telling us about what is coming next?
Well, Afrobeats, as you know, began more than a century ago, and Asian began 50 years ago already. But I think as the world is one, and as Martin said, there are so many different places where new things happen that it's very difficult to see something global, something which will be a global tide. In my view, I think what I see as a trend, which is very interesting, is the renewal of old cultures and new and former and old instruments, which are coming from Africa, Asia, Central Asia, where we see the rebirth of something which was new in the past but was forgotten. And I think this fight between old culture and unified, standardized music is very interesting. What you said about hip hop is also very interesting because it demonstrates that music is coming from everywhere, not where is it expected, and mainly by the streets. And I mentioned in the book 50 years ago that the street is going to be a place where music is going to raise. I still wait for the beginning of a music raised by people worried of the future of the world. I don't see that. Maybe it exists somewhere, but I don't see that, either by the words or by the sounds. You have sounds, for instance, at the beginning of the 20th century, you have sounds that are hints of worries about the future of the 20th century, and the 20th century was a disaster. But music was aware of it. I can name many music at the beginning of the 20th century which signals the dangers of the 20th century. I don't see that here today because I think I'm sorry to say that, but the dictatorship of entertainment is so strong. The fact that music is mainly today, wherever it is, a way of avoiding to think, that we don't see anymore music as a sign of worry. It was a sign of Stravinsky, as well as Ravel, as well as whoever you can name, from Berio to whoever, was aware of the risk of the 20th century. They were saying it, crying it, before it happens. And don't forget that the Bolero and the dissonance of Bolero was just some months before 29 crisis, as a sign that he was aware that the dissonance of the world of repetitiveness, which is in the Bolero, is going to crack in the crisis of 29. We don't have that today. Or maybe I don't know. While the world is cracking by all means, and this gap, which is maybe a gap of my own ignorance, I'm sure it is, I hope it is, but it is something that worries me. I don't hear you.
And just as a question to Sarah, is it coming through, Jacques?
Yes, thank you.
Sarah, so for new genre to evolve, and there are lots of people that want to do mashups and interpolations and derivative works, there is a sense in what you and I do all day as, legal rights, clearance, etc. There's a view that data hold-ups and clearances are what's somehow stopping whole new genre, whole new abilities to derive works. What tells you that in the evidence you see, or are there changes that could be made to remove friction, to allow for that more derivative, more expressive ways for people to make new noise?
I think we see that already. There are so many holdups, and even just trying to do discovery, who actually owns and represents all of the rights that would be required to clear, to handle things properly. Sample, interpolation, any real true derivative work, and that does include mashups, that includes medleys. What falls under copyright protection is technically required to clear, so that's a multitude of things. But we see that already with stuff that gets uploaded to SoundCloud, and SoundCloud sits in a middle space where a lot of what's derivative on there is not cleared, but it's also on the composition side not generating anything, so is it required? There's a lot of gray area. And if there were a clean-cut way to discover who the true owners of every part of the copyright were, perhaps that would be easier. I'm afraid that we fall into now a little bit more piracy with music and what's noticed as infringement versus what just exists. Maybe people on Reddit see it, but it's certainly not widespread and information everyone has access to. So without a clean way on both sides, composition and master recording, to understand rights, it's really not an easy feat. And that's why we have, at least in my point of view, a lot of instances where we actually see a new work, including a very interesting and very unique interpolation, usage of a new sample. It simply never sees the light of day because in some cases it's just too difficult to make contact with all of the people, all of the clearance parties. It's very fragmented in that sense. So my fear would be that it leads to simply more piracy. We're in a position right now where we're clearing lots of samples. I see some new recordings that have 3-4 old recordings included. What happens when that new work wants to get sampled? Now we're going to have 20 new recordings? It's simply not feasible. We're not set up to handle rights that way. Everyone getting 0.5%. It doesn't make sense. So that's one end of the pendulum where we feel so strongly about copyright protection, and yes, the law allows for it, but it's not going to be realistic in the marketplace. At some point, I would expect we swing in the other direction, where things become more commonplace to have derivatives included, and it's not going to have quite the same clearance issue. So it could go either way. We either have a much better process for doing that in the future, maybe a centralized rights database, including both sides, or we end up in the other scenario where it's just too difficult. So culturally, it might become normal for people not to proceed with clearance the way we are right now.
So Martin, I'm going to talk about governance of music online, because that's something that policymakers are thinking about quite a lot. And there is a view that moderation or algorithmic tools or other elements that they're really important. And there are other views that this shapes what can be heard and to what extent that a culture is being shaped by a sort of an invisible hand. How does we balance that freedom of expression with people being safe, protecting rights? How do you think about that balance that policymakers are trying to struggle with?
That's a very simple question, Cliff. Thank you for that.
Easy.
I haven't got an answer for that, but I've got a few loose strands, a few riffs that I think are interesting. First one, I'm really taken with what Mr. Attali was talking about music as a prophecy, a predictor, a societal one. And the absence of what we see in terms of anything, if you take a particularly interesting happening. So what can we see in music? Something that struck me, and it will lead very quickly to, I think, somehow an answer, is this term, the gig economy. We hear it all the time. There was a queue outside here for drivers for some kind of fast food delivery service. But hey, where did they get that term, the gig economy, from? From everybody being a musician. So maybe the prophecy is that the future of this kind of economic world is we can see it from our past experiences of music. Prior to AI, things were pretty bleak for everybody anyway. So with respect to both lawyers who are present, I hope that we need to find new ways of making money. And that's something we can do with these new tools, because we can't make less money than we were making before. And further to that, I was lucky enough, and I think Michael's here from Premier Records from Lagos. I was lucky to be invited to speak there in June. And I want to take up something that Mr. Attali mentioned. He mentioned Afrobeat, but we know there's a distinction between Afrobeat and Afrobeats. Now, one of the distinctions I want to make is that, for me, Afrobeat was always associated, as a huge fan of Fela Kuti, with political protest. It's not something I associate with Afrobeats, though I do realize it can be a form. And when I was in Lagos, what I saw was an exaggerated expression of all of our kind of privileged fears, which is that you had a huge youthful creativity. They saw AI as being a way, how can we use this to make things better? Exactly the same questions we should be asking. Like, how can we fix something that's broken? And if we accept that that's kind of links up those kind of riffs, then I think that goes back to the idea of what governance means. So governance just literally means, how do we mark this in some way? How do we create a community that indicates this? And for instance, Matthias' description of what he was hoping to do with Music Frontiers, of bringing different stakeholders together and getting everybody to chat, is pretty much it. Anyway, I hope that goes some way that you could draft a constitution.
Well, I suppose to our guest of honour, to Jacques, do you have a sense of what needs to change first in order to make the music ecology thrive more? Is it discovery? Is it payment? Is it metadata? Well, what's your thoughts as to what are the things we should think about changing to make music thrive?
Well, that was one book which was published 50 years ago. I was happy to have it translated around the world and now still studied. I'm happy to hear Martin said, and I hope Martin will write a second volume of Noise, because what he said was exactly what should be in the second volume of Noise. It's up to him to do it. I also agree on what has been said on the fact that it's key to keep the way to have some way to have rights in order for musicians to make their living out of music. And this is absolutely key. Even if today we see in AI in general the fact that many jobs are disappearing, and that's true also in music, with a huge risk of that, with a huge concentration of wealth in some hands and a large number of people without any rights. And therefore the fight to keep the rights as you are doing and to keep them, to give it to the musician is fundamental. I believe we should increase many things that are not existing enough, which is basic, which is teaching music at school, everywhere in the world, and teaching music, how to make music, how to like music, how to know the history of music, how to know different instruments, or to create an instrument, or if you use technology. I mean, music should be a part of education, much larger than it is. It is a part of education in some countries. And when music is a large part of education in Finland as well as in China, you should look at it. It's developed a lot of creativity in other fields. There is a lot of relations between music and mathematics, for instance. And then my recommendation, which will be to push for the development of education of music, history, music as a prophecy, music as a tool, and not music as a difficult thing to do. I mean, music is always seen by children as something that is a punishment at school and a pleasure when they are teenagers. Then I think education of music, which is an amazing field of knowledge, an amazing field of mathematics, science, the melange of ethics, beauty, and science. Nowhere is better than in music. And therefore, if I have one recommendation to insist on, it will be to lobby for more music in the schooling systems.
Bravo, I believe, is the translation of that. For our final part, we're going to talk about music as a tool and the complicated question of authorship, because that is something that the music industry is really struggling with. So, Martin, from a practical perspective and making music, how are artists using AI at the beginning of a song in terms of writing or producing or performing?
From my experience, and this is from my students as Ableton trainers, so I mean, we can see that pretty much, like everybody who's here who's involved in the tech, every part of the process is now becoming AI-induced. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the most curious parts for me is where that AI disappears, where there is a sense of what the community about that. Like, I'll give you an example, for instance, the idea of democratizing songwriting. The question is, you should really maybe work with somebody else, another human being. Might be nice, have a cup of coffee. Every stage that we are seeing AI is involved, and that's also just, I feel, contributing to kind of a lot of the sadness that we see. Sorry for being a bit bleak on that. It's not really the answer to the question you asked me. I could give you a bunch of technical things, but I think we have to look at it holistically. And that goes back to the idea of the parts that I'm curious about is the rejection of these values, these assumptions, and the idea of music being a community of amateurs coming together and having fun. That's how I got involved in it. I'm a useless musician.
Sarah, a question I'm often asked is, in this new world of creativity, where everyone has heard everything, and everyone for the first time has access to everything, because that's new, how do we separate influence and infringement, particularly when you've got these technological tools that can create these tapestries? And if a writer were to use AI to inspire a melody or a harmony, is there a clear and fair way to acknowledge that, or is that just inspiration?
I think the distinction can come down to simply how I determine musicological cases. If you're comparing two works trying to assess influence or infringement musically, it's very clear what you can look for. On the composition side, I'm looking at strictly musical elements: melody, harmony, rhythm. It's not in relation to how it sounds in the recording. It's not in relation to elements that are unique to only a recording. It's the composition itself. So when you look at true similarity, and in infringement cases, you're looking for substantial similarity. That's not simply, this reminds me of this other song I know. That's your vantage point. But substantial similarity you would be able to see on paper. And that's where you would determine true infringement versus just influence. There are a lot of common characteristics in music. I mean, we have something, especially in the jazz world, called the rhythm changes, the blues. It's a common set of chords that are heard countless times, tons of other genres. Certain rhythmic progressions are simply just used all over the place. So it does have to be substantial, and like you mentioned, the access is critical. Aside from the musical similarities, access is something that must be considered. Now that we have access technically to everything in the digital space, we would look at it as direct versus indirect access. Direct being, my A&R is also that person's A&R. We have the same producer, same co-writer in the room. Indirect being, it existed on Spotify 7 years ago, it's totally plausible you heard it. So that really does make a difference, and that can play a pretty big role, especially if we're talking about common co-writers, common ideas. This is a characteristic of infringement cases that can't go unnoticed. Now, I think also, just to bring it back to Mr. Attali's point about music education, there is some of this that should be taught. The distinction between music as you understand it, you're learning an instrument for the first time, you're learning to read, you're learning what types of fragments of music come up commonly in your repertoire, versus how that translates to the commercial music space is simply lost in a lot of cases. And if you had the privilege of learning an instrument, perhaps in childhood, even later in life, the way you learned a program, let's say you learned how to do sampling digitally through one of the digital audio workspaces, that could be a commonality, and instead we treat them so separately. So there could be a lot more opportunity for folks, whether they play instruments or simply make music digitally, to understand some of these concepts and have that in the back of their head when creating. We're missing that right now.
Okay, well, that brings us to the vexed question. We've talked about education, but we've got the vexed question of learning, and we've got people looking at large language learning models, and there are these models that learn from archives, some of it copyright, some of it not. I was interviewing a chap by the name of Professor Kevin Green a few weeks ago, and his view was that there should be reparations to black artists who have been ripped off, and he wanted to start with the Rolling Stones, right? He didn't want to talk about the digital world. But Jacques, when you've got these large language models, these algorithms learning from archives, in plain language, is there a fair starting principle for who should own those outputs, or are we asking the wrong question?
No, it's a right question, and it's up to the legal team to find solutions. I do think people should have a reward for whatever it is, and I agree with the reparation on the past. I would add that we are just at the beginning of what is happening. For instance, I think I see two avenues where things will move and could provide new questions and new answers. For instance, people are having small groups because it's economically better to have a small number of musicians. But with AI, you can have orchestras of 1,000 musicians. You can have orchestras of 1 million musicians. And you can have new sounds with different instruments within that. That's one direction which have not been, in my view, clearly explored. The second is more linked to what you just said, is that we can think today of having a very famous musician, interpreter of the beginning of the 20th century, when we begin to have records, good records, 1920, for instance, playing today with a musician of today. You can have Caruso singing with Elton John. And I can go much further into that and think about many new encounters that can bring a lot to the world. We can't go further back because of lack of records, but we have a huge avenue of encounters which are still to be explored and which are not yet explored. Can you imagine a duo between Caruso and Madonna? Why not? You can do it, and that could be interesting. And I'm sure people will try to do so. And then, in terms of copyrights, it's a good question to ask.
Thank you for that lovely move back to the lawyers. I like that, Jacques. Well, look, I'm going to come to... I found this fascinating. Thank you. I'd like to come back for some closing reflections now to the panel, to give a more expansive way to set off these 2 days of conferences. I'm going to start with you, Martin. Is there a principle, is there one principle for trustworthy AI in music that we can adopt now rather than doing it in retrospect?
Yeah. Trust. So...
that's a novel concept for much of the music industry, you understand?
Yeah. And it's an oxymoron. It is... but again, if we are to predict the future, it is a curious one. So trustworthy AI was a term that came out defined by the EU HLEG, the High Level Expert Committee, as the thing that we should go. And these words like cyberspace or metaverse come in and out of fashion. But it's kind of interesting that we would look for an example of trustworthy. And if we think about what trust is. So I'll just speak about this for a second. I'll keep it short.
Please.
But I think it's kind of inspirational to me, and it's also something that I thought happened to me. I was giving a talk in Liverpool when I thought I was being set up because basically I had to speak about trust. And they were saying, look, what's your technological solution? Everything requires a technological solution. We cannot trust people to put music out that has not been this or that. If you think about it, the basis of everything to do with attribution, copyright distribution, is all about piracy or thievery. And yet we're looking at trustworthy AI, so we need to start off with trustworthy humans. And maybe that's not as complicated as it sounds, or as romantic. And if it is romantic, what's wrong with that? So I'll give you an example. We think about trust. How many of you were searched when you came in here today for guns or for knives? Matthias might be going, oh, I kind of skipped that. Okay, but the fact is, well, we won't, because we don't need to be. Going onto an airplane, yeah, I'm kind of, I'm happy for it to be done, and I don't mind queuing. If we think about how creative we are with music technology, that any technological solution we will come up with, the first thing that we'll think of is a way to hack that, to break that. And yet, the basis of all business that we do, by and large, in music, is through barter, is through an exchange of trust, an exchange of service. At best, I'll fix you up later. Or a recognition that there's a little bit of money, but there's a whole load of everything else. And whether you're putting on a music festival, you're going, we got this bit, but how do we stretch that to feed and make all this happen? That's all based on trust. It works. When I was in Lagos and I asked about trust, it was like kind of, well, yeah, that's the basis of Ubuntu philosophy. And they looked at me like I had 10 heads because it was like a stupid question. So I think maybe that's what I would say.
Thank you. Sarah, one quick practical change you would like the industry to make in the next 12 months to enable this space?
I have lofty goals. 12 months is probably not feasible. But even to answer your previous question about credit, even for AI, but also about what's happening already, sample interpolation clearances simply don't get noticed in our rights pictures. I shouldn't have to refer to who sampled for a congregate of the community's understanding of what samples are included in certain works. And unless you're in the know, sometimes that information is just not available to you. I would have lofty ideals that everyone could have access to what is sampled, interpolated in certain works. Not only would it be great for everyone's understanding of how music is moving and being reused, because that's a critical part of music history that is so common right now, and we just don't have the public understanding of why, how. It's all by hearsay. And sometimes it's confirmed and sometimes it's not real. So that doesn't help with our current infringement landscape and accusations being thrown out 24/7. You stole my song. And that can come from anyone. That can come from a user on Meta. That could come from a comment on Instagram. And sometimes it's scary to hear that. So a space where, as a music community, it could be verified how we're reusing, reworking derivatives would be, I think, critical to our current landscape, and it's missing.
Thank you. Well, look, we have a final minute, and we have to give that to our guest of honor, Jacques Attali. Jacques, what is a short, sharp prediction for music and society over the next few years?
I'm not an oracle. I'm just listening of what you said, and I would say I am still waiting for the birth of music that will lead to hope for the future of mankind. In my view, it will come from Nigeria or India, which in my view are the two countries which are providing the best of the future in terms of hope and positiveness. I'm still waiting for that. I don't expect anything from the West as well, anything from China, because dictatorship cannot produce that. But it can come also from elsewhere, because that's fascinating with music. Something fundamental can appear nowhere. The fact that music is always using what has been done before, it's not new. It was true in the beginning of ages, as well as the 12th century, and the relations between music of the elite, so-called elite, and music of the people, and the circulation of music from the elite to the people is very common, not new. And that circulation is still there, but I still hope that we'll see a birth of the music somewhere in Africa or somewhere in India, at least in democratic countries or place where freedom is at stake, that will provide us a small glimpse of hope.
Jacques, I know you can't see us, but the room is absolutely with you. Thank you for that. You are an oracle. It is a fantastic book. And thank you very much indeed to our fantastic panelists, to our great audience, to the organisers who, it's not easy to pull something off like this, so they've done a brilliant job. And also to you, Monsieur Attali, thank you very much. Merci infiniment.